"I need money, Mom," my son said, handing me a folder as if it were just another household bill. "It's my wife's debt, $300,000. Don't let me down," he added, his voice dripping with contempt. I just smiled, poured myself another cup of coffee, while he kept scrolling on his phone. 6 hours later, my bank account was empty. That night, when they came back for the money, the house was empty. Only an envelope sat on the kitchen table. When they opened it, their faces turned pale. The next morning, the doorbell rang 3 times in quick succession, as if something urgent had happened. I knew who it was even before I opened the door. My son, Richard, only showed up unannounced when he needed something. I set down the half-finished cup of tea on the counter and slowly walked down the hallway. Through the living room window, I saw his luxury SUV parked carelessly in front of the gate. Richard had inherited his father's business acumen, but none of his patience or empathy. When I opened the door, he was already there, phone in one hand, a brown envelope in the other. His face, so much like his father's, was tense. "Mom," he said, brushing past me without a hug, just an obligatory air kiss. "We need to talk." Richard walked straight into the kitchen, as if he still owned the place, though he'd moved out more than 15 years ago. He sat down in my chair, placed the envelope on the table, and kept typing on his phone. "A cup of coffee would be nice," he said without looking up. I made it automatically. 10 years of widowhood, and I was still serving the men in my life, as if that were my sole purpose. When I placed the cup in front of him, I noticed his fingers were tense, knuckles whitening as he typed. "How's Fernanda? And the kids?" I asked, referring to my daughter-in-law and grandkids I rarely saw. "They're fine," Richard replied flatly. Finally, he set his phone down and took a sip of coffee. "I'll get straight to it. Mom, I'm in trouble." I sat across from him. The clock ticked slowly on the wall. "Fernanda got involved in something bad," he said, sliding the envelope toward me. "She made a bad investment." I opened it carefully. Inside were bank statements, debt notices, and a loan contract marked in bold red, $300,000. My heart sank. That was nearly all of my retirement savings, plus what was left from selling our downtown condo after my husband, Edward, passed away. "Richard," I said hoarsely, "that's nearly everything I have." He took another sip, his cold eyes finally meeting mine. "Mom, you don't really need that money. You live here alone, everything's paid off. Your expenses are minimal. You're 68. What are you saving it for?" The words hit like a slap. The house, my only asset, was still in his name. Edward's decision years ago, supposedly to avoid inheritance issues. "It's not that simple," I murmured. "I still have medications, doctor visits." Richard tapped the table, cutting me off. "Fernanda got scammed, okay? She trusted the wrong people. If we don't pay by tomorrow, things will get bad." "These aren't bankers, Mom. They're dangerous people." "How dangerous?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You don't need to know the details," he said impatiently. "Just trust me. It's just a loan. I'll pay you back once the business stabilizes." I stared at the envelope, then at the face of the boy who once played in my backyard, now a stranger sitting in my kitchen. "You've borrowed from me before, Richard." "I've never seen a single dollar come back." His expression darkened. "This time I'm serious, Mom. This isn't the time for drama." He stood and began pacing like a caged animal. "I'm your only son. You've always said you'd do anything for me." I heard the familiar tone, the same manipulation Edward used for decades. "I need time to think," I said quietly. "There's no time," Richard snapped. "I need the money in the account today. Tomorrow's too late." He stood behind me, placing his hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy, like a chain. "Mom," he said, his tone softer now. "You know I'd never ask if it wasn't serious. This is for Fernanda's safety, for our family's safety." That word family, the spell that had kept me obedient for years. "All right," I whispered. "I'll transfer it." Richard exhaled in relief, smiling for the first time since he'd arrived. "Thanks, Mom. I knew I could count on you." He checked his watch. "I've got a meeting, but I'll come back tonight for dinner, and we'll finish up, okay?" I nodded, unable to speak. He grabbed the folder, kissed my forehead, and headed out. "Don't let me down, Mom," he said, like a parent scolding a child. The door slammed shut. I stood there, staring at the half-full coffee cup, realizing I'd just made a terrible mistake. Through the window, I watched his car speed off, gravel scattering across the garden I'd tended for years. And then it hit me, an idea the old me would never have dared to consider. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Marisa, it's Diane. I need your help." Less than 30 minutes later, my friend arrived. Marisa and I had met in college nearly 50 years ago. She'd gone into law. I had dropped out to marry Edward. She'd never approved of my choice, but had always stood by, waiting for me to wake up. $300,000? Marisa nearly choked on her tea. "Diane, are you out of your mind? That's everything you have." I shook my head, feeling the weight of truth. "It's not the first time. Last year it was $100,000 to expand his business. Before that, $50,000 to fix a supplier issue. I never saw a dime returned." Marisa slammed her cup down. "Why do you keep doing this, Diane? You used to be smart. Why can't you see what's happening?" Her question hit like a punch to the chest. I went silent. "Because he's my son," I said finally, the old reflex speaking for me. "And you're his mother, not his bank," Marisa shot back. "Edward manipulated you for 30 years, and now your son's walking the same path. When are you going to stop it?" I looked out at the garden where my roses had finally bloomed after years of struggling in poor soil, just like me, surviving against the odds. "Today," I said, surprising even myself. "Today?" Marisa asked. I took a deep breath, feeling something inside me break apart and come back together. "I want you to help me transfer all my money into an account Richard doesn't know about, and I want to leave before he gets back." Marisa's eyes widened, then she smiled slowly. "Diane Miller, I've waited nearly 50 years to hear you say that." She pulled out her phone. "I've got a vacation condo in Florida empty. The keys are at my office. He's coming back tonight, right? That gives us about 10 hours. More than enough. First stop, the bank. Then we'll go to the notary to set up legal representation in case he tries anything. After that, we pack and go." I stood, terrified but exhilarated. I'd never made a bold decision in my life. "He's going to lose his mind," I muttered. Marisa took my hand. "Are you afraid of him?" I thought of Richard's face when things didn't go his way, his voice hardening, his eyes turning cold. "Yes," I admitted, like I was afraid of his father. "Then it's time to stop being afraid," Marisa said, squeezing my hand. "Go pack." I went upstairs and pulled out a suitcase I'd used only twice in 10 years. I packed a few clothes, medications, documents, and a few pieces of sentimental jewelry. In the drawer, I found a small wooden box Edward had never known about. Several $1,000s I'd saved from selling baked goods and embroidery over the years. My small secret act of defiance. I picked up a framed photo of my mother, then paused at a picture of Richard as a child. After a moment's hesitation, I set it down. When I returned to the living room, Marisa was on the phone. "The flight to Florida is confirmed for 3 p.m. We'll have time for the bank and the notary." At the bank, the manager looked at me with surprise when I asked to transfer everything to a new account. "Are you sure?" "It's a substantial amount." "Completely sure," I said, signing the papers. "And please, don't send statements to my home address." While we waited, Marisa looked at me. "What are you planning to leave for Richard?" "A note," I said, "and a lesson he should have learned long ago." When we returned home, I wrote a short message and placed it neatly on the kitchen table. "The one who disappointed you is me. This debt cannot be repaid with money." As I pulled my suitcase toward the door, I glanced back at the house that had been my prison. In the garden, the roses swayed in the wind, free and strong, like I would be from now on. In the taxi to the airport, Marisa held my hand. "Are you okay?" The city blurred past the window, carrying away the years I'd lost. "Not yet," I said. "But I will be." Marisa's condo in Florida was small but cozy, overlooking the ocean. That first night, I sat on the balcony listening to the waves. When I turned on my phone, there were 17 missed calls from Richard. I turned it off again. I wasn't ready. "He'll find you eventually," Marisa said, pouring wine. "We'll need a long-term plan." I nodded, strangely at peace. I never thought I'd have the courage to do this. "I always knew you did," Marisa smiled. "You just needed a push." In the days that followed, my phone kept ringing. Richard, his wife Fernanda, even my sister Claudia, they were all pulled into it. In one voicemail, Richard's voice wavered between pleading and threatening. "Mom, please call me back. You can't just disappear. The house is in my name, remember? Think carefully, Mom." A week after I left, I began rebuilding my life. I opened a new bank account, rented a small apartment near the beach, and sold baked goods and embroidery at the local fair. At 68, I'd never truly worked before, but to my surprise, people loved what I made with my own hands. Marisa stayed in New York but acted as my eyes and ears. She told me how Richard had shown up at her office, furious, demanding to know where I was, threatening legal action, claiming I was mentally unfit. "What did you say?" I asked. "I told him you're perfectly sane, and if he keeps threatening, I'll file for a restraining order," Marisa laughed. "You should have seen his face. I bet no one's ever said no to him before." Bye. At the end of the first month, I received a letter from Richard's lawyer, demanding I return immediately, citing concerns about my mental health and threatening to seize control of my estate. In the same envelope was a handwritten note from Fernanda, filled with desperation. "Diane, please come back. Richard is out of control. The creditors are closing in. We need you." I handed everything to Marisa, who responded formally on my behalf, attaching my latest medical report confirming I was perfectly sound, along with a detailed record of all the money Richard had coerced me into lending over the years. "It'll be fine," Marisa reassured me. "But Richard won't give up easily. He just lost his personal bank, and that was you. It's driving him crazy." The next month, I got an unexpected visitor. My daughter-in-law, Fernanda, showed up at the door of my small rented apartment. Her face was pale, her body thin. "How did you find me?" I asked, stunned. We hired a private investigator, she said, looking ashamed. Can I come in? I hesitated but eventually opened the door. Fernanda looked around the tiny apartment, surprised. It's cozy, she said, clearly taken aback that I'd chosen such simplicity after leaving behind a big house. It's mine, I replied softly. We sat on the small balcony, the ocean glimmering in the distance. Fernanda held her teacup, hands trembling. Things are bad, Diane, she whispered. Richard's changed, he's become angry and unhinged. My voice broke. And my grandchildren? They're scared. They don't understand what's happening. Richard sold the car. Now we're trying to sell the beach condo to pay off the debt. She paused. It's not just $300,000, Diane. It's much more. I wasn't surprised. Edward had done the same, always hiding more debt. So, you didn't come here to convince me to return, I said. You came to ask for more. Money. Fernanda lowered her head. It's more complicated than that. The people we owe aren't patient. Richard told them you still have money. A chill ran through me. He used me as collateral? Fernanda stayed silent, but that silence said it all. You need to get out, Fernanda, I said, gripping her hand. Take the kids and go to your parents' house. It's not that easy, she said shakily. He controls everything, accounts, papers, even my phone. I don't know how I managed to escape. I looked at her, my heart aching. Just like I once didn't know how to get out, but I did. I can help you, I said. Not with money, but with getting free. Fernanda looked at me. Fear and hope mingled in her eyes. He'll find us just like he found you. Then we'll be ready, I said, feeling a strength I'd never known before. First, we get you and the kids out. After Fernanda left with a concrete plan and a new phone, number I'd hidden in her boot, I sat on the balcony, watching the sunset. The orange sky burned bright, like a symbol of my own transformation from darkness into light. My phone rang. It was Marisa. Fernanda came to see you, didn't she? She asked immediately. How did you know? Richard showed up at my office again, this time with a loan shark big guy, face full of scars. They hinted at things, wanted to know where you were. My heart sank. What did you tell them? I told them if they so much as touched you, me, or anyone connected to you, I'd make sure they spent the rest of their lives in prison. Marisa paused. Diane, this is getting dangerous. Richard's desperate now. I know, I whispered, watching the last ray of light fade below the horizon. And desperate people do desperate things. The next morning, there was a loud knock at the door. My heart raced. Had Richard found me? But when I looked through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize. Are you Diane Miller? She asked, as I cracked the door open, still leaving the latch on. Yes. She held up a badge. I'm Detective Olivia from the police department. We need to talk about your son, Richard Miller. My heart pounded. Is he in trouble? Olivia kept her composure. May I come in? I invited her inside and made coffee. She sat on the small living room sofa. Mrs. Miller, she began, your son is under investigation for financial fraud, falsifying documents, and having connections with a loan sharking ring. We need to know if you're aware of any of these activities. It felt as if the ground disappeared beneath me. A part of me had always sensed that Richard wasn't doing honest business, but hearing the words criminal investigation left me shaken. I only knew he was having financial problems, I answered, but I didn't realize how serious it was. She took notes, then asked, You left your home about 2 months ago. correct? Why? I told her everything, the repeated loans, the manipulation, the pressure over $300,000. Olivia listened carefully, occasionally jotting things down. Did he ever use your name to sign documents? Or make you sign papers without explaining them? I thought back. Yes. A few years ago, he told me to sign some papers so he could transfer money easily in case of emergency. He said it was to protect me in old age. She nodded. We've found several suspicious transactions in accounts under your name, accounts you probably didn't even know existed. I closed my eyes, my stomach tightening. Richard hadn't just manipulated me, he had stolen his own mother's identity. What should I do now? I asked, trying to stay calm. We'll continue investigating. You'll need to give an official statement soon. And to be honest, your son might face charges within the next few weeks. You should also be cautious about your safety. When Olivia left, I immediately called Marisa. She promised to fly down to Florida that same day. I always suspected Richard was involved in shady business, she said over the phone, but not to this extent. That afternoon, I received a text from Fernanda. He found out about our plan. I'm locked in the room with the kids. He's smashing everything. My whole body went cold. I called Olivia right away, and she sent police officers to Richard's house. The following hours dragged by in fear and endless phone calls. By nightfall, I learned that Fernanda and the children were safe, while Richard had been arrested for resisting police intervention. Later that night, Marisa arrived and found me sitting quietly on the balcony, staring at the dark ocean. She sat beside me in silence for a while, then asked, "How do you feel?" "Guilty," I whispered. "If I hadn't left, maybe things would have been different." Marisa shook her head. "No, Diane. If you hadn't left, you'd have gone down with him, maybe even gotten pulled into his scams." She held my hand. "You did the only thing you could. You saved yourself, and maybe Fernanda, and the kids, too." The next morning, the newspaper headline stunned me. "Businessman arrested for fraud and links to organized crime." The photo showed Richard in handcuffs, led away a stranger, not my son. The phone rang. It was Olivia. "Mrs. Miller, your son wants to see you. He'll only talk to you." I looked at Marisa, who already knew. "You don't have to go," she said. "Not after everything he's done." "I have to," I said firmly, surprising even myself. "I need to look him in the eyes to end this." The police station was cold, the fluorescent lights making every wrinkle on my face seem deeper. Richard was led into the visitation room, his hands cuffed, wearing a gray prison uniform that made him look smaller, older. When he saw me, his eyes so much like his, father's, filled with tears. "Mom, you came." I sat across from him, keeping my distance. "You wanted to see me." "I'm here. I'm in serious trouble, Mom. You don't understand," he said quickly. "Those people aren't joking. If I can't pay them—" "No," I interrupted calmly. "You're the one who doesn't understand. I didn't come here to give you money. That time is over." His face hardened from weakness to anger. "You left me when I needed you most. You abandoned your family." "No," I said, taking a deep breath. "I'll tell your children that their father made the same wrong choices his grandfather did, and that I finally did what was right." Richard slammed his cuffed hands on the table. "The house is still under my name. You have nothing left." "I still have myself," I said, standing up. "The one thing I nearly lost because of men like you and your father." I turned toward the door, then stopped. "Fernanda and The kids are safe. They'll have a chance to start over away from you. So will I. As I stepped out of the station, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The Florida sunlight blazed, brilliant and warm, after the cold artificial lights inside. Marisa was waiting in the car. "How was it?" she asked. I looked back at the building where I had left both my son and my years of blindness. "Freedom," I said, smiling the first genuine smile in years. 6 months passed since I left, and Richard was arrested. Winter came, the sea winds grew strong, the waves restless. My small apartment had become a real home now, with potted plants on the balcony and colorful embroidery I made hanging on the walls. Fernanda and the kids, Lucas, 8 years old, and Mariana, 6, had moved to a quiet inland town near her family. We video called every week. Marisa taught me how to use the technology. The kids were adjusting, though they still asked about their father sometimes. "Grandma, when can we visit you?" Lucas asked. "During the July summer break," I promised. "We'll build sandcastles and collect seashells on the beach." Fernanda appeared on the screen, smiling softly. She looked healthier now, rosy cheeks, gentle eyes. "Are you really inviting us, Diane?" "Of course. The apartment's small, but there's room for everyone. I want to hear the kids' laughter here." After the call, I sat watching the waves hit the shore. Richard's trial would be next month. The charges were severe fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Marisa predicted at least 10 years. I agreed to testify not out of hatred, but for justice for me, for Fernanda, and for everyone Richard had deceived. Then the phone rang, an unknown number. "Mrs. Diane Miller?" a male voice said. "Yes, who's this?" "I'm Robert Mendez, your son's attorney." My chest tightened. Lately, Richard had been changing lawyers constantly, each promising miracles but delivering nothing. "What do you need?" "Richard wants to negotiate. He has information about bigger operations that prosecutors might find useful in exchange for a lighter sentence, but he needs your help." I sighed, already knowing where this was going. "Financial help, right? To pay for your so-called special legal team?" $200,000, he said. I laughed. "Unbelievable. I don't have that kind of money, and even if I did, I wouldn't spend it on this." "Mrs. Miller," his tone hardened, "your son could serve over 10 years. As a mother, as a mother?" I interrupted. "I've done enough for decades." Now Richard would face the consequences himself. There was silence on the other end. Then the lawyer spoke quietly. "He said you'd respond like this. He asked me to tell you he still has copies of the papers you once signed, documents that could implicate you in some of his dealings." My stomach twisted, but my voice stayed firm. "Tell my son that blackmail is another crime to add to his list, and that I'm ready to face whatever comes if it means ending this cycle." I hung up, my hand trembling, and immediately called Marisa to tell her everything. "He's just bluffing," Marisa assured me. "Every document you ever signed was already verified by the police as coerced. The investigation has made his behavior pattern very clear." Still, I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake, remembering every paper I'd ever signed for Richard or Edward, so many contracts, authorizations, documents I barely skimmed because I trusted they had my best interests at heart. The next morning, there was a loud knock at the door. It was Agent Olivia, accompanied by another officer. "Mrs. Miller, we need you to come with us to the station. There's been a new development in your son's case." "On the way." Olivia explained that Richard had tried to bribe a guard to smuggle a phone into his cell. Fortunately, the guard was part of an internal investigation and recorded everything. At the station, they showed me the transcript of the call Richard intended to make once he got the phone. It was to one of the men he owed money to. His voice was clear on the recording. "My mother has money stashed away. If I can't pay, you know where to find her." The words froze me to the bone. My son had been willing to put his mother's life on the line just to save himself. "Mrs. Miller," Olivia said gently, "with this new evidence, we're recommending temporary protection and advise you to relocate." Once again, the police escorted me home. Marisa was already there, having been informed. She hugged me tightly the moment she saw me. "I'm looking for an apartment with full security for you, a gated community with guards." I looked around my little apartment, the plants I cared for each day, the curtains I sewed myself, the window that faced the sea and brought me peace every morning. "No," I said, surprised by my own voice. "I'm not running anymore. I won't let Richard keep controlling my life, even from behind bars." Marisa looked at me with a mix of worry and admiration. "Diane, those people are dangerous." "I know. I'll be careful. But this is my home, the first one I ever chose for myself. I'm not giving it up." In the following days, we installed a new security system, cameras, alarms, reinforced locks. The police increased patrols, and 2 plainclothes officers took turns watching from a car outside. Fernanda called me, panicked after hearing the news. "Diane, please come stay with us." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I reassured her. "I've got my own life now, craft fairs, friends, even senior swimming classes." I laughed. At 68, I finally know who I am when I'm not taking care of ungrateful men. A week later, when things had calmed a bit, I received a court summons to testify at Richard's trial. "Marisa, still staying in Florida with me, read the paper. Are you ready?" Seeing him in court won't be easy. I looked out at the ocean, the only friend who had never judged me. "I'm ready." The courthouse in downtown Miami was large and imposing. It was my first time back since leaving, and the city felt foreign. Marisa drove while I stared out the window. "Nervous?" she asked. "Strangely, no," I said. "It just feels like closing a chapter." In the courtroom, I sat with Marisa in the front row. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, came over to shake my hand. "Mrs. Miller, your testimony today is crucial. Richard's trying to portray himself as a victim of manipulation." "He's always been good at playing the victim," I murmured. The side door opened, and Richard entered with 2 officers. He looked gaunt, his face hollow. His eyes met mine, pleading, but I stared back, calm and steady. The judge entered, and everyone rose. The proceedings began with formalities, then expert witnesses described the complexity of Richard's fraud schemes. When my name was called, I stood and walked to the witness stand, my legs trembling but my resolve firm. After being sworn in, the prosecutor asked, "Can you describe your relationship with the defendant, your son?" I looked straight at Richard. "I raised him alone after my husband died 10 years ago. Before that, we looked like a normal family, but only on the surface." "What do you mean by that?" "My husband, Edward, Richard's father, was also controlling and financially manipulative. Richard learned from the best." "And how did your son manipulate you financially?" I recounted everything: the repeated loans, the false promises, the subtle threats. The last time, he demanded $300,000, all of my savings, to pay off his wife's debt. When I realized I'd never see that money again, I left. What made you finally decide to leave after so many years? I paused. It was the contempt in his voice. When he said, "Don't let me down, Mom," I realized that in his eyes, I wasn't a person, just a walking wallet. Something inside me broke, and then reformed into something stronger. Richard's attorney rose for cross-examination, brimming with confidence. "Mrs. Miller, do you consider yourself a good mother?" I saw the prosecutor about to object, but I signaled her to let me answer. For decades, I believed being a good mother meant giving everything: money, time, even dignity. Now I know being a good mother also means teaching your child accountability and consequences. "You abandoned your son when he needed you most," he accused. No, I stopped enabling his self-destruction. There's a big difference. And these alleged threats you claim he made, how convenient that you mention them now, just as he's negotiating for a plea deal. I stayed calm. The recordings speak for themselves. I gain nothing from watching my own son sell out his mother to criminals. I only see tragedy. When my testimony ended, I returned to my seat, my legs shaking. Marisa held my hand silently. The trial continued with statements from employees, victims, and Fernanda, who described the long years of deceit. I watched Richard grow more agitated, bowing his head and muttering angrily to his lawyer. When the judge called for a recess, he looked at me one last time, his eyes no longer pleading, only cold and full of hatred, and it sent a chill through me. That night in the hotel room, I couldn't sleep. That look haunted me, the same look Edward had whenever he didn't get what he wanted. The next morning, we returned to hear the sentencing. The prosecutor presented the case clearly, while Richard's lawyer tried to paint him as a businessman who had simply made mistakes rather than a criminal. When the judge went into deliberation, Marisa and I went to a nearby cafe for coffee. I stirred my cup absent-mindedly, then noticed a man sitting a few tables away, watching us. When I turned, he quickly looked away. "Marisa," I whispered. "That man is following us." She glanced subtly. "Maybe a reporter. The case is getting media attention, but his posture, the way he pretended to be casual yet kept watching, made me uneasy." "I want to go back to the courthouse," I said. As we left the cafe, he stood up too, keeping his distance but following. I informed the officers stationed at the courthouse. They nodded and said they would keep an eye on him. When the session resumed, the judge returned. In the case of the state versus Richard Edward Miller, the court finds the defendant guilty on all counts. A wave of relief washed over me, followed immediately by a deep sorrow. The child I once cradled in my arms was now officially a criminal. The court sentences the defendant to 12 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 4 years, along with fines and restitution. Richard remained silent. As officers came to take him away, he turned his head toward me. "This isn't over," he said clearly enough for me to hear. "You'll regret it." As we left the courthouse, I saw the same man standing in the distance. I pointed him out to the police, and he vanished into the crowd. "We need to fly back to Florida right now," I told Marisa. "I don't feel safe here." The following week, I tried to return to my routine. The police only checked in periodically now, saying Richard's threats weren't credible while he was behind bars. One afternoon, after returning from the fair where I sold embroidery, I saw a strange car parked near my building. The windows were tinted dark, parked perfectly to overlook the main entrance. Unease crawled up my spine. I didn't go inside. I kept walking and called Olivia. "It might be nothing," she said, "but let me check. Stay in a public place." I went into a nearby cafe, sitting by the window. 20 minutes later, police cars arrived. 2 men from the strange vehicle stepped out, trying to leave, but were stopped. My phone rang. It was Olivia. "Mrs. Miller, we've detained 2 men with criminal records. They were carrying an unregistered gun and a piece of paper with your address on it." A chill ran down my spine. "They might be Richard's associates," Olivia said. "We're questioning them now. Do you have somewhere safe to stay for a few days?" I immediately called Marisa. Her answer was firm and fast. "I'll be there in an hour. We'll go to my beach house in Florida. No one knows that place." I returned to my apartment under police escort to grab a few essentials. As I hurriedly packed, I looked around the home I had built with love. Once again, I was running, or maybe not. An idea was forming, something the old Diane would never have dared to think, but now it made perfect sense. When Marisa arrived, I told her my plan. "That's risky," she warned. "Living in fear forever is riskier," I replied. "I'm tired of running." The next day, instead of hiding at Marisa's beach house, I returned to my apartment with a clear goal. With Agent Olivia and her team's support, we set up a trap. The 2 men arrested earlier agreed to cooperate for reduced sentences and confessed that Richard, using a smuggled phone in prison, had hired someone to scare me, a mild phrase for something far darker. "He meant real harm," Olivia explained. "He just wants to prove he still has power, even behind bars." The plan was simple. I'd stick to my normal routine, acting unaware, while undercover officers monitored the area. When the hired man showed up, he'd be caught in the act. For 3 days, I lived on edge. Every sound made my heart jump. Every stranger passing by filled me with suspicion. On the 4th morning, as I was watering plants on the balcony, I saw a man leaning against a utility pole across the street, staring directly at my apartment. Our eyes met for a brief second. I quickly stepped inside and signaled to the cleaning lady, in reality, an undercover officer. "It's him," I whispered. "I'm sure of it." He watched for about 30 minutes, then slowly crossed the street toward the door. The doorman, another officer in disguise, let him in. I sat in the living room facing the door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The officers hid in the bathroom, door slightly ajar. The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and opened it. "Mrs. Diane Miller?" the man asked. He looked so ordinary he could have blended into any crowd. "Yes. I have a message from your son." Before he could do anything else, 3 officers appeared and pinned him down within seconds. He didn't resist, almost seemed relieved to be caught. That afternoon, Olivia arrived with news. The man had confessed to everything. Richard had promised him $5,000 to teach his ungrateful mother a lesson. And what exactly did that mean? I asked. Olivia hesitated. "He was told to wreck your apartment, threaten you, and," she paused, "leave you with some bruises. Nothing fatal, just enough to make you feel unsafe, forever." I collapsed into a chair, my legs trembling. "Is that enough to add more charges against Richard?" "Plenty," Olivia said. "Assault conspiracy, solicitation of violence, and threats. This will eliminate any chance of parole." A week later, I visited Richard in prison. He looked stunned, perhaps he hadn't believed I'd come. "I'm here to say goodbye, Richard," I said as we sat across the thick glass. "Goodbye," he frowned. "She confessed to everything. I continued. You'll be facing more charges and could stay here much longer. I paused. But that's not why I came. I came to tell you that I'm moving on. Richard gave a bitter laugh. Moving on? You're 68. You're alone. No, I said calmly. I'm free. And I've discovered it's never too late to start again. My whole life, I only knew myself as Edward's wife and Richard's mother. Now I'm learning to be Diane. He looked at me with a mix of scorn and confusion. So who is Diane? I smiled sincerely. A woman who finally learned to value herself. A woman who no longer knows fear. Richard slammed his hand against the glass in anger. You think it's over? It's not. One day, I'll get out. When that day comes, if it ever does, I'll be ready. I stood up. Goodbye, Richard. As I walked out of the prison, I felt lighter, as if I had shed the weight of an entire lifetime. The sky that day was bright blue, the air crisp and cool. Marisa waited in the car. How was it? She asked. Freedom, I answered with a genuine smile. A year after leaving, my past behind, autumn came to Florida, painting the trees in shades of red and orange. My small embroidery business had grown. I had 3 students, older women like me, who came weekly, mostly to talk and share stories. Fernanda and the kids had visited twice. Lucas and Mariana filled the apartment with laughter, building sandcastles on the beach and collecting seashells to decorate the balcony. Fernanda worked as a teacher in her new city, slowly regaining her confidence. Richard's sentence was extended by 3 more years for hiring someone to threaten me. Olivia occasionally shared updates. He was quiet now, perhaps finally accepting his fate. One Saturday afternoon, as I returned from the craft fair, a woman was waiting outside my building. She looked to be around 50, with streaks of gray in her hair and a familiar face. Are you Diane Miller? She asked. Yes. I'm Christine Albright. I was Edward's wife before you. I froze. Edward had once mentioned that his ex-wife was unstable and greedy. Now I saw the irony in those words. Please, come in, I said. We sat in the small living room, 2 cups of tea between us. Christine explained why she had come. I read about Richard, how he manipulated you for years. Edward did the same to me. When I read your story, I knew I had to find you, to close that chapter. How did you find me? It wasn't hard. Your story has been shared in support groups for women who suffered financial abuse. You've become a symbol of strength. I was surprised. Me? A symbol? Christine smiled. A woman nearly 70, who walked away from everything, who faced her own son in court. Yes, Diane, you've inspired many. We talked for hours. Christine told me how Edward had isolated her from her family, controlled every penny, made her believe she was powerless. When they divorced, he left her nearly penniless, then married me. Her story echoed my own life. When he died, Christine said, I felt both relief and anger. Relief that he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. Anger because justice never came. He never faced the consequences. I understand, I said softly. I used to blame only Richard, but now I see Edward planted the seed. My son was just the result of the example he saw. The cycle continues, Christine whispered, unless someone ends it. As evening fell, we exchanged contact information and promised to stay in touch. After she left, I stood on the balcony watching the sunset, thinking about it all. Edward and Richard, father and son, Two men who once ruled my life were both gone now. One in the grave, one behind bars, leaving behind scars I was still learning to heal. That night, I wrote in my journal a new habit. Today, at 69, I realized I've spent most of my life trying to be who others wanted me to be. A devoted wife, a self-sacrificing mother, a walking bank account, always giving, always afraid to disappoint. Now I'm learning to be myself, stronger, braver, more capable than I ever imagined. I can't get back the money Richard took, nor the years of suffocating marriage with Edward. But the time I have left belongs to me, to live, to breathe, to choose without fear, without control, without regret. The next day, I received an email from Christine. She said she had spoken with several other women in similar situations and wanted to start a support group. I agreed immediately. The first meeting took place at a cafe near the beach. 5 women gathered, each carrying stories of financial control and emotional scars from husbands, sons, or brothers. We shared, listened, laughed, cried, and celebrated small victories. At the end, Marisa, who had come with me, said, "You ladies should make this something official. There are so many women out there who need to hear these stories, who need to know it's never too late to start again." The great idea spread quickly. A few months later, Rebegin was officially born, a non-profit organization supporting women who had suffered financial and emotional abuse. I used my embroidery skills to design the group's logo, a radiant phoenix rising from ashes. Our first public workshop attracted more than 50 women. I trembled as I stepped onto the small stage, but once I began to speak, everything became clear. My name is Diane Miller. I'm 69 years old. For nearly 7 decades, I let others control my life and my money first, my husband, then my son, until the day my son demanded $300,000, nearly everything I had. That was the day something in me broke, and then I was reborn. I looked at the attentive faces before me. It's never too late to say no. It's never too late to begin again. And it's never too late to discover who you truly are when you stop living for others' approval. Applause filled the room. 2 years after I walked away from everything, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Richard. The handwriting was slower, less impulsive than before. "Mom, it feels strange to write this. I don't think I deserve to call you Mom anymore. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted to say I've started therapy in prison. The therapist helped me see things I never saw before, that I've been repeating Dad's behavior, seeing people as tools, not as humans. I'm not making excuses, just admitting the truth. You were right to make me face the consequences. Maybe you'll throw this letter away, I understand. I just want you to know that, no matter what, I'm proud of you. I saw your picture in the news, speaking to those women. You look different, stronger, Richard." I read the letter many times, my emotions tangled. Cautious because I knew too well how manipulative Richard could be. Sad because I thought of all the things that could have been different. And somewhere deep down, a fragile hint of hope. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I took the letter to my next therapy session, a healthy routine I had learned in my new life. "What do you want to do?" my therapist asked after I finished reading it aloud. "I don't know," I said. "Part of me wants to believe he's really changing, but another part reminds me of how many times I've been deceived before. And what if both parts are right?" The therapist said softly. "What if he truly is trying to change, but it's still not safe for you to go back? That question stayed with me for days. In the end, I wrote a short letter in return. Richard, I received your letter. I can't say I believe everything you've written. Trust, once broken, is hard to mend. But I acknowledge your effort to seek help and reflect on your actions. My life is now focused on supporting women who've gone through similar experiences. I've found peace and purpose in that work. I hope you also find your own path. If that path truly leads to change, maybe one day we can speak again, not as mother and son as before, but as two people trying to become better. Diane. I mailed the letter with no expectations. Months passed without a reply, and that was all right. My life had moved in its own direction, away from Richard and the darkness of the past. Spring arrived in Florida, painting the city in bright colors. Our organization, Rebegin, grew quickly. We now had a small downtown office and a team of dedicated volunteers. Twice a week, we hosted free classes on financial management, something I had to relearn from scratch at 68. Fernanda had become a regular collaborator, sharing her own journey of financial and emotional recovery. My Saturdays were always for my grandchildren. Lucas, nearly 10, loved fishing on the pier near my apartment. Mariana, 8, preferred to sit by the window and embroider with me. One afternoon, as we stitched together, she asked, "Grandma, are you happy now?" I froze for a moment, looking at her innocent face, her curious eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," I said softly. "Happier than ever, even without your grandpa and your dad." I chose my words carefully. "Sometimes, Mariana," I continued, "we have to walk away from people we love to find ourselves again. That doesn't mean we stop loving them, it just means we learn to love ourselves too." She thought for a while, her little brows furrowed. "Like when I want to be alone in my room even though I still like playing with Lucas?" I laughed. "Exactly like that." By June that year, I received an unexpected call. It was Agent Olivia. "Mrs. Miller, I'm calling to inform you that your son will be moved to a work release program next month." I froze. I thought his sentence was extended. He's shown good behavior, completed rehabilitation programs, and his lawyer petitioned for reduced confinement. He'll still have strict restrictions, but he'll be allowed to work during the day. I thanked her and hung up, the old unease returning. Richard would soon have partial freedom. What would that mean for me, for Fernanda, for the kids? I called Marisa right away. "Do you think I should be worried?" After listening, she replied with her usual practicality. "We'll increase the apartment's security, just in case. But honestly, I don't think he'll do anything stupid. He has too much to lose." A week later, I received another letter from Richard. Unlike before, his tone was measured and distant. "Diane, next month I'll be transferred to a work release program. I wanted you to hear it from me, not someone else. I'll be working in a reforestation project during the day and returning to the facility at night and on weekends. I have no intention of interfering with your life. I've learned my lesson. The therapist here says respecting boundaries is the first step toward healthy relationships. I'm trying to practice that. I also wanted you to know I've contacted Fernanda about the kids. She's agreed to let me write to them under supervision. Maybe one day I'll see them again when she feels it's safe." The fact that he no longer called me Mom at the start or end of the letter caught my attention. Richard truly seemed to be acknowledging new boundaries, admitting that the old relationship couldn't be repaired. I shared the letter with Fernanda during our next video call. "Yes," she said. "I gave him permission to write to the kids. The therapist said we shouldn't make them think their father is a monster. His letters are different now. He asks about their hobbies, doesn't make promises or complain. I asked, "Do you think he's really changed?" Fernanda shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe he's just learned to act better. That's why everything's supervised. She paused. And you? Will you reply? I thought for a moment. I think I will. Just to acknowledge I know and to maintain the boundary. I wrote briefly, "Richard, thank you for informing me about your transfer. I wish you luck in this new phase. I'm glad you're allowed supervised contact with your children. They deserve a good father if you can truly be that person. As I've said before, I've found my path. I hope you find yours. Diane." July arrived with suffocating heat. One sweltering afternoon, I got a call from the rehabilitation center. "Mrs. Miller, this is Sophia, the case manager. It's about your son." My heart raced. He's fine, not injured. But today at work, he argued with another inmate, and surprisingly, he didn't fight back. He went to find a supervisor instead. Because of that, he's now being targeted by others, and we're concerned for his safety. "What does that have to do with me?" I asked. Richard requested a transfer to another project where he can work, alone or under close supervision. We have an opening in the urban restoration program, replanting trees at a park near your neighborhood, but we need your consent due to your shared history. I stayed silent for a few seconds, trying to process it. Richard had chosen not to react, even when provoked, something he had never done before, and now he needed my permission. "Did he ask specifically to work near here?" I asked. "No, ma'am," she said. In fact, when he heard the location, he hesitated and asked if there was another option, but this is the only safe placement available. I was surprised. He was truly trying to respect distance. "How far is that from my home?" "About 15 blocks, and he's not allowed to leave the area. He'll be monitored at all times." I took a deep breath. "All right, I agree." After hanging up, I wondered if I was being naive or simply learning to show compassion without crossing boundaries. I called Marisa and told her everything. "You did the right thing," she said. "Keeping him safe doesn't mean lowering your guard. It just means you're still human, still capable of empathy." The following week, Richard started working at the park. I changed my grocery route so I'd pass by occasionally, keeping my distance. From afar, I saw him planting trees under the sun, thinner, calmer. Once, he seemed to sense my gaze and looked my way, but I didn't approach. By August, another letter arrived. "Diane, I know you saw me at the park a few weeks ago. Thank you for not coming closer, and thank you for approving my transfer. This job helps me find peace. There's something deeply grounding about turning an abandoned space into something green and useful for others. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation, just expressing gratitude for a kindness I don't deserve." This letter felt different, calm, sincere. I decided to respond with a small gesture. The next day, I sent a high-quality gardening tool set and a book on landscape design to the community center, overseeing the project. No name, no expectations. Weeks passed without a reply, and I was content. I had learned that healthy connections don't need instant reciprocation or control. In September, Rebegin hosted a major seminar on financial independence for women. I was the keynote speaker, sharing my journey from total dependence to self-sufficiency. That morning, the room was nearly full, with over 100 attendees. I stepped onto the stage, my heart trembling yet determined. "Hello," I began. "My name is Diane Miller. At 70, I'm learning who I am when I'm no longer defined by the men in my life." The audience chuckled softly, many nodding in understanding. 2 years ago, my son came to my home demanding $300,000, almost everything I had. Like every other time, he thought I wouldn't dare say no. And as many here know, those patterns don't just appear overnight, they're built over years. For me, it began with my husband, who controlled every dollar, every decision, until I believed I couldn't manage life on my own. As I spoke, there was a slight stir at the back of the room. A tall, lean man quietly entered and stood by the door. My heart tightened. It was Richard. I froze for a moment. The audience noticed the change, and a few turned to look where I was staring. I took a deep breath and continued. The hardest yet most liberating moment of my life was when I finally said no. When I walked out of that house with just one suitcase and the determination to never live as someone else's shadow again, I spoke for another 30 minutes, always aware of Richard's silent presence in the back. He never approached, just listened. When I finished, the audience rose in applause. Women came up to me, sharing their stories, asking for advice, thanking me for mine. Richard stayed at the back, patiently waiting until the crowd thinned. When the room was nearly empty, he walked toward me slowly, hesitantly. His eyes carried a vulnerability I had never seen before. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi," I replied. "Your speech was powerful and hard to hear." He paused, then added, "Thank you for the gardening tools." We stood in silence, the distance between us both strange and heartbreaking. "How did you know about this event?" I finally asked. "Fernanda mentioned it in a letter," he said. "I got special permission to come just to listen." I nodded, realizing for the first time that he no longer assumed permission but asked for it. "Are you doing okay?" I asked sincerely. "It's different now," he said after a long pause. "I'm learning to live with my consequences, to exist without manipulating, without controlling anyone." He looked straight at me. "It's harder than I thought." "It usually is," I replied. Richard checked his watch. "I have to go back. I'm only allowed out for 2 hours." He hesitated, then added, "You turned something terrible into something meaningful." What's the right word? Not proud. Exactly, maybe impressed. Or even inspired. As he turned to leave, I called out without thinking, "Richard." He stopped and looked back. "Would you like to get coffee sometime? In a public place." "Of course," he said, genuinely surprised. "I'd like that. I'm not promising anything, not reconciliation," I added. "I understand," he said softly. "This already means more than I deserve." A week later, we met at a crowded cafe near the park where he worked. A correctional officer sat a few tables away, watching discreetly. The conversation started awkwardly, both of us trying to step into unfamiliar territory, not as mother and son in the old sense, but as two adults trying to build a different kind of connection. "How are the kids?" Richard asked after ordering coffee. "They're doing well," I said. "Lucas is obsessed with astronomy, and Mariana's learning to play the flute." Richard smiled faintly. "They mentioned that in their letters. Fernanda even sent me a few pictures." I took a sip of coffee, gathering the courage to ask what had been lingering in my mind. "Richard, what made you start seeing people as tools to be used?" He looked out the window for a long time, his profile briefly reminding me of his father. Probably since I was a kid, he said slowly. I watched how Dad treated you, how he always got what he wanted. It seemed to work. So I learned from that at school, at work. Controlling people made me feel like I was winning, until I wasn't. And now? I asked. Now I'm learning that being effective isn't everything. Real relationships require give and take, not exploitation. I'm trying to remember that people aren't just means to an end. We talked for nearly an hour. There were no tears. No dramatic reconciliation. Just two people speaking honestly, maybe for the first time. When we said goodbye, Richard asked, "Would you like to meet again?" "Maybe," I said. "One step at a time." The next morning, as I walked along the beach with Marisa, she asked, "Do you think he's really changed?" "I think he's trying," I said. "And that's already more than Edward ever did." "What about you? Are you ready to forgive him?" I looked at the waves crashing and forming again endlessly. "Forgiveness isn't something you do once and finish," I said quietly. "It's something you practice every day." I'm learning to forgive him and myself for letting it go on so long. That afternoon, I sat on my balcony and wrote in my journal. Today, at 70, I realize life rarely offers perfect endings. There's no guarantee that Richard has truly changed or that he'll stay on the right path. And there's no promise that I'll never come to stick it offing, falter again. But maybe life isn't about finding perfect endings, it's about beginning again, as many times as necessary. It's about breaking harmful cycles, even when it feels impossible. It's about believing we can be bigger than our worst mistakes. The $300,000 Richard demanded from me 3 years ago was the price of my freedom, steep, but small, compared to the cost of living a life that wasn't mine. I'm not wealthy now. I live simply, earn enough from selling my embroidery and my modest savings. But I'm richer than ever, rich in real friendships, purpose, peace, and courage I never knew I had. If there's one lesson I want to leave for my granddaughters and for the women I meet through Rebegin, it's this. It's never too late to say no. It's never too late to find who you truly are once you stop living to please others. It's never too late to start again. At 70, I wasn't ending my story. I was finally beginning to write the truest chapters. I closed my journal and watched the sunset cast shades of orange and violet across the sky. Tomorrow would bring another day at the organization. Another chance to turn pain into purpose, to turn experience into strength that helps others. The doorbell rang. Marisa appeared, holding a bottle of wine. "To celebrate," she said, stepping in. "Celebrate what?" 3 years since you said no. 3 years of freedom." We laughed and raised our glasses in the sunset light. "To courage," I said. "To Diane," Marisa smiled and corrected. "The woman who finally started living her own life." Maybe what changed me wasn't time, but realizing that love cannot exist where control and fear live. Family shouldn't be where we lose ourselves, it should be where we grow and rediscover who we are after the wounds. I once thought forgiveness was something we gave so others could find peace, but I've learned it's a gift we give ourselves to be free. If you've ever had to choose between staying out of duty or leaving for peace, I hope my story helps you see that walking away isn't always the end. Sometimes, it's the beginning of a life where you finally live for yourself, not for anyone else. And what about you? Have you ever had to let go of someone or something to begin again? Share your story with me in the comments, because maybe your story will be the strength someone lost out there needs. And if you'd like to keep walking beside me through these journeys of courage and healing, stay here with me so we can keep learning how to love without losing ourselves.
Oh, I just sat there silently for a while, tears streaming down my face uncontrollably, like I had just witnessed a 68-year-old woman rediscover herself after years of being swallowed up by family responsibilities. As a son who saw my mother sacrifice everything for my siblings and me, selling all her possessions to pay for our education, I see Diane's story as more than just a financial scam drama. It's a journey from emotional slave to a free heroine. It made me both heartbroken by Richard's manipulation and admire Diane for daring to disappear in her twilight years. A belated but powerful lesson. Let me share my honest feelings as if I were confiding in you, along with an analysis of each detail and the lessons learned, because this video isn't just a story. It's also like a self-help book for mothers and grandmothers who are suffering for their children. Let's start with a general impression. This story reminded me of films like The Help or Fried Green Tomatoes, where older women unexpectedly rebel against a toxic family system. Diane isn't the weak, vengeful victim type. She uses her wisdom and the support of her friends to turn the tables, even transforming her grief into the Rebegin charity. I felt sorry for her for losing all her savings to her selfish son, but at the same time, I was proud that she found joy at 70, selling cakes, embroidering, and teaching finance classes. And Richard? Oh my God, that kind of man disgusts me. Using "I love you" to drain money, then resorting to threats when he's finished. Fernanda is pitiful, caught in the middle. After watching it, I immediately called my mother, asked how she was doing, and thanked her for her silent sacrifices. This video is not only entertaining, but also healing, a reminder that age is not a barrier to starting over, and family is not an excuse to be exploited. Analyze each key detail. I will follow the narrative, analyzing each piece to clearly see the escalation of manipulation and how Diane transforms from victim to controller of her own destiny. It's like a vivid novel, full of emotional detail, but also imbued with profound realism. Opening scene: financial manipulation and the decision to transfer money. Approximately midnight to 5 o'clock, Diane, widowed after her husband Edward, sells her condo to get $300,000 in savings. But her son Richard bursts in demanding she pay off his wife Fernanda's debts because he defrauded her, presenting bank documents and loan agreements. He threatens the creditors, pressuring her to transfer the money immediately, and Diane, accustomed to subservience from her husband's time, agrees. Analysis: this part infuriated me because it was so familiar. The manipulation begins with the family needs help, but reveals Richard's selfish nature. I felt indirectly angry at Edward for teaching his son a male-centric mentality, making Diane take sacrifice for granted. The scene where she realizes her mistake after he leaves is the first turning point, creating immediate empathy. The "how stupid I was" kind of situation. Personally, I think if Diane had called her friend sooner, things would have been different, but it also shows the power of isolation that a villain uses to control. Escape and a new life in Florida, approximately 5 to 12 a.m. Diane called her old friend Marissa, her lawyer, transferred all her remaining money to a hidden account, left a note saying, "It's me who disappointed you, Mom. This debt can't be repaid with money," and flew to Marissa's vacation condo in Florida. She rented a small beachfront apartment, sold baked goods, and did embroidery, and opened a new account. Richard returned to the empty house, his face pale, and called to threaten her. Oh my God, this part is incredibly motivating. Analysis: this is the first arc of freedom. Diane doesn't cry, but acts quietly, using her intelligence to disappear. The letter she left behind is a devastating psychological blow, forcing Richard to face the consequences. I feel relieved for her as she integrates into Florida, from selling goods on the street to finding personal joy. The scene where Richard threatens her, leading to his house being in her name, clearly shows an escalation from begging to control. As a man, I wonder, if my son did that, how would I teach him not to become like Richard? Marissa's intervention and Fernanda's revelation: Richard goes to Marissa's office demanding Diane's address, accusing her of being not sane, But Marissa uses medical records to refute this and lists a history of forced borrowing. A lawyer's letter demands Diane return. Fernanda sends a handwritten plea, admitting to owing over $300,000 and that Richard used Diane as collateral. Fernanda goes to Florida, recounts Richard's financial control, and Diane advises her to flee with her children, Lucas, 8, Mariana, 6, to her parents' home. This part is the most moving. Analysis. The twist of Fernanda being a victim, not an accomplice, makes the story more humane. She's trapped in a toxic cycle. I admire Marissa as a supporting hero, using legal means to protect her friend. The lawyer's letter and Fernanda's plea emphasize the theme: pervasive manipulation, affecting an entire generation, including Diane. Personal feeling. It serves as a reminder that women often form alliances to overcome toxic men, and Diane begins to repay by saving Fernanda. Dangerous escalation and police intervention. Richard hires creditors to threaten Marissa. Detective Olivia investigates financial fraud and forgery. Diane reveals she signed suspicious documents for Richard. Fernanda is locked up with her child in Richard's rage, calls Diane, and the police arrive to arrest Richard for resisting arrest. It's spine-chilling. Analysis. This is the action climax, but realistically based on the law. Olivia as a symbol of justice. I trembled thinking Diane was almost implicated in her son's crime, and the scene of saving Fernanda shows the power of a support network. This plot point clearly illustrates financial manipulation easily leads to violence, and leaving early, like Diane did, saves lives. The trial and its consequences. The court revealed Richard's fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Diane testified, refuting the abandoning charge. He received a 12-year prison sentence, parole after 4, and a fine. His lawyer demanded a special $200,000, which Diane refused, recording a phone call revealing the plan to harm her. Police arrested the 2 men who hired them to assault her, and Diane tricked them into confessing. The sentence was extended by 3 years for incitement to violence. Diane visited him in prison, ending the toxic relationship. A satisfying sense of justice. Analysis. The trial wasn't dramatic like a movie, but deeply psychological. Diane confronted her past, refusing unconditional mother's forgiveness. The recording and the trap were masterful, showing she learned from her mistakes. I scoffed at Richard's downfall, but also felt pity because he was a product of Edward. The end. Healing and a new chapter. Fernanda and her niece clean the house and heal their wounds. Diane establishes Rebegin to support abused women, using embroidery to raise funds and give seminars. Christine, Edward's ex-wife, contacts them, and they reconnect. Richard writes a letter of remorse and begins therapy. Diane visits the cafe to supervise and set limits. 3 years later, Rebegin develops a finance class. Diane teaches her niece embroidery, and her diary entry reads, "It's never too late to say no, to start over." Warm and hopeful. Analysis. The ending isn't sentimental, but realistic. Richard progresses, but Diane prioritizes peace. The victim-to-speaker arc is a powerful message. Old age is an opportunity for rebirth. The encounter with Christine closes the loop of the past, creating a sense of completeness. Lessons learned. From this story, I've drawn a few lessons that I can immediately apply to anyone who is nurturing a viper in their bosom with their children or family, not theoretically, but from a real-life situation. Don't let maternal instinct blind your financial intuition. Diane transferred $300,000 out of habit, but the lesson: always check the paperwork, as Marissa advised, and have a separate hidden account. If your child needs emergency funds, ask a lawyer or friend first. Save her from bankruptcy. Leaving is the bravest act, even if it's late. Diane disappeared at age 68, saving herself and Fernanda. The lesson: in toxic situations, silent action, transferring money, running away, is more powerful than confrontation. And remember, friends like Marissa are a valuable shield. Build your network early. Manipulation often originates from the family model. Richard learned from Edward, and this influence spread to Fernanda. The lesson for parents: teach your children responsibility, not, "I'll take care of everything." And for the victims, testifying like Diane did is not betrayal, but justice, and the law, in Olivia, always sides with the weak if there is evidence. Healing is about building, not forgetting. Diane started Rebegin from embroidery, forgiving Richard with limits. Lessons learned: turning pain into help, seminars, funds, and setting clear boundaries, supervised cafes. You can start at any age, like Diane at 70, happy with her grandchildren and friends. In short, this video is a bitter pill to swallow for parents who are suffering for their children, reminding them that you deserve to live for yourself first. After watching it, I checked my mother's savings and promised myself I would never let her sacrifice again. If you've ever seen someone in your family being financially exploited, this story will be incredibly inspiring. Which part touched you the most? Tell me, and we'll continue our conversation.